Hi there, it's Ian here, and you're watching Grumpy Opinions, the show where I'm going to tell you all about what I think of films, TV shows, games, and life in general. Let's get on with the show. Game of Thrones is the biggest TV show in the world that's currently on. It's about a fantasy kingdom of politics and infighting and dragons and ice demons and zombie deadites and even more politics after that. As ever, if you're new to the channel, please subscribe and follow me on Twitter at Grumpy Opinions. So let's go. Episode 2. Jenny's song picks up again at Winterfell just shortly after last week's ending, and Jaime Lannister, who just arrived, he's now being held to task by all and sundry. And first, Dany points out that he murdered her father like King Crazy the Firestarter, and her and her brother always wanted to get him dead for that. And he straight up just says, Cersei lied, there's no army coming, she's got all these mercenaries protecting King's Landing, and so you're gonna have to fight her after you've defeated the undead. But he wants to fight on the side of the living, and that's more important to him than honour. And Tyrion says a couple of words in his brother's defence, but Dany isn't having any of it. And so then it's up to Brienne to vouch for Jaime. And it turns out that's good enough for Sansa. And Jon, well, because Jon will take anything for a quiet life, so he's good with whatever. And so it's settled, and Dany realises that pretty much nobody has her back. So Jaime gets his sword back and everybody breaks for lunch. And then Dany goes through Tyrion, again, because clearly she blames him for basically all kinds of stuff, and threatens to take away his wee brooch of power. And then he catches up with his brother again, and all's kind of forgiven between them. I mean, between them at least, but the Northerners still clearly don't like them. And why would they, after everything that's happened?
The masses rejoice.
And then they talk sisters and kings and tactics, and Jaime spots Brienne from the battlements and goes down for a chat. And there's a bit of strange sexual tension there, but she ends up being really surprised because he's nice to her, and then asks to fight under her command, because, nowadays he's just basically a mediocre soldier with one hand, not the genius swordsman and commander he once was. I mean, presumably he's still a good commander, but, nobody's going to listen to him, especially in the north. And also, he stops to catch up with Bran, and that goes about as well as conversations with Bran goes, because Bran's turned out a bit of a weirdo now.
You still would be, if you hadn't pushed me out of that window, and I would still be Brandon Stark.
You're not?
No. I'm something else now.
Dany, on the other hand, she kind of cools off like her crossface, and tries to have a bit of a Mean Girls with Sansa. And the pair of them actually kind of hit it off, because they've got more in common than they thought. And they joke about how silly the boys are, and Sansa points out that Jon loves Dany, and therefore, he might be a fool for love, so she has to question his motives and things. And Dany retorts that, she's off fighting Jon's war instead of actually going after the Iron Throne, which she's wanted her whole life. So, there's a lot of love in this house. And Sansa's not an idiot, things are okay, but she hasn't got much time for mucking about, so she asks, the pertinent question. And then?
No! No and then!
And then?
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 And then! Stop piss me off.
And of course Dany's all well, and then I kick Cersei's ass, and Yas Queen, I rule everything. And Sansa's nah mate, the North gets to be free, yo. But before things get really sour, they get interrupted, because it turns out Theon came home, and Dany knows him, and asks about Yara, and then Sansa's hey buddy, and it's all hugs, and yeah, and ever get the feeling you're the one that's left out, Dany? And outside of that, things and stuff are prepping for war, and Arya and Gendry get back to their forge flirting, and it's a little bit less coy and a wee bit more psycho. But clearly he's still into it, so he gets to work on making her a new toy. And then the zombie hunter crew turns up, and it's big hugs all around. Oh, behave yourself, Tormund. Ugh. Anyway, Jon hears the news about the Umbers, and it's bad, and the king's going to be on them before the next dawn, with his whole army of undeadites, and a zombie dragon. So it's War Council time, and the plan is to kill the Night's King, clearly. Because if you kill one, then the rest will die, because that's story logic these days. Anyway, using Bran to lure him to the Godswood, and then they'll send in the dragons, and while the rest of them are holding off the Deadites, which seems like a good plan all round, dangerous but good. And then Jon's bye Felicia, and he walks away, leaving Dany to stew once again. And after that, it's just a case of waiting for the inevitable. So Arya goes to catch up with the Hound, but before they can actually sit down and talk and be normal and open up to each other, Beric comes to say hi.
Oh, for fuck's sake.
So she's hell with this, finds Gendry, and he gives her the stabby staff that she asked for. And then he mentions offhand that, he's actually King Robert's bastard. And after that, she's all well, quick one before we all die. And he's aye, go for it. Nice. And elsewhere, Middlebear's been catching up with Weebear, so it's a bit of a Mormont reunion. And Mildred of the Worst Witch tells him she's going to do a bunch of fighting, and he's yeah, okay. And then Sam gives Jorah his family sword, because let's face it, I mean, Sam isn't exactly up to the Braveheart kind of stuff, and the rest of the people in his family are all dead who could have wielded it. But most of the crew are just chilling out by the fire, and telling stories and drinking wine and...
Giant's milk.
behave yourself, Tormund. Anyway, somebody mentions that Brienne isn't actually a knight, and Jaime's like, well, I can sort that. So a knight can make a knight. So he like dubs her up to full chivalry status right there and then. And everyone's like really happy. And then Pod pulls out his party trick. No, I mean Pod sings a song, because it turns out the guy's got an amazing set of lungs on him. And that only leaves like Dany and Jon. And they're like hanging out down in the crypt. And she clearly wants to know like why she's getting the cold shoulder off her man. And she asks about Lyanna's statue, and he ends up telling her the whole truth. That he's actually the son of Lyanna and Rhaegar, and technically he's the legit king. And wouldn't you know, the first thing that goes through her head isn't like, ew, I've been kissing my nephew. It's the straight road to, you ain't getting my throne. Honestly, priorities, doll. And just then, the horns start blasting outside, signalling the arrival of the undead hordes. Game time. Or, well, it will be next week, because roll credits. So what did I think? Well, I mean, this is the second episode of the final season, and it was a surprisingly slow-paced one. And actually, it's the second ever episode of the entire show that I can think of that took place entirely in one location. I could be wrong about that, but the only other one I can remember was the Battle of Blackwater. And the Blackwater was like mostly build-up and then a huge battle, and this episode was mostly just, well, actually, it was all just build-up. But I'll talk about that a bit later on, because there's a load of amazing and surprising stuff this week, because it was mainly a character episode, so let's cover that first. The fact is, after last week's many meetings, there was still an awful lot of underlying issues, tensions, vying egos between citizens of Winterfell, people visiting, and some people who hadn't actually got back yet that did this week. And some of the only wee issues, like, who's going to fight and who's going to stay in this crypt, which seems like a pretty poor choice of hiding place if you're up against Arm of the Undead, but I suppose the dead in the crypt aren't going to get up and live, hopefully. But yeah, but there was stuff like that adorable wee scene with the wee girl who was talking to the Onion Knight, and then, she was speaking to Gilly. Remember Gilly, everyone? Yeah. She's pretty good in this, actually. Yeah, she was good in that film, God Help the Girl. You should totally watch that. Anyway, there was this sort of thing. People exist and people like just getting things ready for the big fight. That's what this episode was all about. And let's face it, a good 10 minutes of this episode was literally just 5 or 6 people and the main folk, sitting around a fire, talking bollocks and drinking, each of them ruminating on the likelihood that basically they're not going to live to see the next night. And speaking of which, Tormund, my god, man, honestly, I tell you though, he is one of the funniest characters in the show, and a lot of that's the writing, but I think a lot of it has to do with the performance from Christopher Hew. His mugging and his kind of bluntness, and it's all been great, even since back in season 2 or 3 when he first popped up. He's just this great, giant Scandinavian maniac. And it's lovely to see like the weird love triangle between him, Jaime, and Brienne, and it's going still strong even at this point. I mean, he might fancy her, but you can see that she only really has eyes for Jaime, even if she doesn't really understand that yet. And Jaime has mad respect for her. Like, he has more respect for her probably than anyone else in the whole of Westeros, because, he's only ever really loved Cersei, but he actually really likes Brienne. And especially, he's just the way that he just goes, oh, what the hell with tradition, and like knights her right there and then. You can tell he actually cares because he knows how much it means to her. And similarly, it's good to see that, there's been so much flirting that's happened over the years between people like them and people like Arya and Gendry. Now, in them, it was kind of a childish sort of just bit of banter back when they were sort of much younger, and she was literally a kid and he was just a latter teenager. But now, like years later, it's a much more mature fashion. And then finally they hooked up. And I imagine that's probably going to be a wee bit divisive to some people, because I mean, quite apart from the fact that it's hard to tell how old these characters are meant to be, and she's always been kind of a bit of a chaste tomboy psycho. But the fact is, the actress who plays her, Maisie Williams, I mean, she's like in her mid-20s or something like that. And I think the character's meant to be about 18. So, I mean, there's nothing actually wrong there. And God knows, if you ever saw the film The Falling, I mean, it's not like she hasn't done a sex scene when she was playing a teenager in that. That was actually a really good film, though. You should watch it. It's basically The Crucible, but in high school. Anyway, it was good. But one other aspect I found a wee bit crazy for the longest time is the idea that Gendry has only slept with 3 people in his life. And one of them was Melisandre, like the Red Witch. I mean, look at this guy. He's buff, he's handsome, and and he actually owned his own forge. So I mean, he's got to have a bit of money. And he was basically this successful smithy down in Old Town after years of being an apprentice down in Old Town. And you're telling me in all that time, there wasn't more than like 2 lassies who ever came up to him and were like, Gendry, you're a bit cute. Absolute nonsense. I don't believe it for a second. Anyway, the pair of them get theirs, and afterwards he's asleep and she looks a bit nonplussed, but oh well. I mean, maybe it wasn't that great, but it's nice that it happened. And one thing I'm really glad about this week was the way that they have this sort of all tied into one of my main suspicions about the ongoing show story. And that's that Daenerys is going to end up doing some kind of big bad dirty on the Starks, because basically she's a bit of an egotistical maniac. She's not a loony. She's not like the Mad King. Like, she's not him reborn or anything. But we've seen over and over and over again in the show that what she cares about the most is the crown and the Iron Throne, because she thinks that's what she's due. You know, it's her birthright. It's what was stolen from her and her family by the usurper. Now, it's kind of fitting that, we've seen that she got to make a bit of a connection with Sansa, because, she's still a decent person at heart. And the second that Sansa pointed out that the North wants its own kingdom, she's like, nah, I don't like that. She was unhappy. But the interesting thing was the fact that Sansa even used the words, what it was taken from us. And you could see in her eyes that she kind of, there's a bit of duality, because she kind of understands what that means. But at the same time, she can't let go of the fact that she feels it belongs to her. And then when John at the end told her like the truth of his upbringing or his birth, she was absolutely horrified, because he actually has a totally legitimate claim to the Iron Throne, a better claim than she has. And she's done all this fighting, and now suddenly, boom. I mean, you could literally feel the getting laid tonight drain right out of that conversation, as well as a tinge of, we might have to kill each other at some point. And it's clever, because, there's not been time for these things to play out sensibly. And because otherwise, if there'd been a bit more time, you think these are reasonable people. They would have actually talked it through. They would have made sense. They would have like done all the sensible stuff and found some kind of accord, or or laid the groundwork for that. But we're not getting that, because they keep getting interrupted, because they're just about to be in a massive battle. But I liked how that was done. And I also liked the fact that they reinforced that by showing about 3 times during the episode Dany either being left on her own or just walked away from by people, or like, always with a look of, I'm a bit of an outsider here, or I'm not part of this on her face. Now that it could just be me, but I feel like that this could be what's going to happen. And I could be wrong. I mean, maybe she will, like she said to Sansa, maybe she's all about what John needs, and she'll actually go, you know what, actually I'm quite happy to be, the wife to basically this guy who's pretty much a knockover for most things, who also happens to be my nephew. But she could be his queen and basically rule, and he'd just kind of sit there and go, yeah, whatever. But I don't know. I suspect that actually it's going to go the other way, and she's going to fulfill her despot destiny. And all they need to do is get this massive, almost impossible battle over and done with first. And that brings me to this week's negatives. Now, the big battle teased last week, and it was teased kind of in what people were talking about and in the teaser. It never came, obviously. And although I actually quite enjoyed the fact that this week felt like a bit of a mini version of Helm's Deep from Lord of the Rings, actually in Helm's Deep, though, they did all these kind of little scenes, and then they actually got to the battle. Whereas in this one, I mean, about the half-hour mark through the episode, I remember I actually checked my watch and thought, shouldn't there be a battle kicking off soon? Because otherwise, there's not going to be time for it this week. And I was right, because there wasn't time for it this week. And it wouldn't be as much of an issue for me. I mean, I don't know how other people feel about this, but for me, that kind of bothers me, because it felt like an awful lot of last week, just more of it. I mean, but at least in last week, they had that little bit where it went to King's Landing for a wee while. Now, we've had 2 weeks of hanging around Winterfell, more or less, with folk just turning up and being like, oh, hi, it's been ages, mind me, remember we fell out and then your pal died at some point or something. I mean, it feels like a bit too much of that. There's no need for it. I mean, it's going round in circles. And it comes a point when things start to feel a bit samey. And in the final season, where we've only got 6 episodes, to have spent 2 hours of that, 2 whole episodes, all in more or less mainly in the same place, waiting for something big to happen, it feels like the show is peddling water. And I don't understand how it could have taken them 2 years to film this. I mean, that said, last week was fine. As I said, it was setting up the chessboard, but this was like somebody just dusting the chessboard table for an hour before anybody gets to play. And I know that this could be part of the whole thing. When with the setup, it could be that they're going to have a massive battle next week, but they've just needed these two to get everyone in the right place. And also because presumably not everyone's going to survive, and you need to give them some time. It's funny though, like I said earlier about it being a bit like Blackwater. In actual fact, it was kind of a bit more like the season 7 episode Beyond the Wall, where most of that episode was basically people walking and talking through the snow. I mean, they did have that one bit where there was a polar bear attack early on, and then they had the big battle at the end. But the rest of it, where it was just people talking and just catching up with each other, which was all good and well written, but that's what this felt like. And the issue isn't that there's actually a problem with the writing. I mean, the writing's good, but the problem is I feel like I'm now waiting a whole other week just to get to a battle that by rights I feel like should have kicked off this week and could have done if you judiciously edited out some of the stuff that happened this week. And part of that I feel comes from like the fact that it's all DB Weiss and Dan Benioff, and because they're writing this now, and were all totally off book from what happened in the George R. R. Martin books. Now, he might have given them a vague outline of what's going to happen, but you can tell that they're basically doing their own thing at this stage. And because of that, the writing feels like it's become a bit simpler. I mean, either because they think that the audience is a bit slow, or, as they said themselves in one of the little video things.
He's a very clever man, but sometimes clever people overestimate their own cleverness.
I mean, I don't mean this in the same way as like Star Wars, Star Trek Discovery. I mean, Christ, not that bad. But in the way that, for example, Tyrion's again coming across as a wee bit thick, and he seems to have just descended and been morose about being a screw up, which would be fine if it felt organic that he was doing this. But it doesn't feel that way. It feels like as soon as he met up with Dany, he just started making stupid decisions, really stupid decisions, things that you think Tyrion used to be really, really clever, and now he's just being dumb. And it's like they didn't know how to write him clever anymore, so they just went, let's just not. Let's just write him kind of moderately intelligent. Now he feels stupid. And now Danny's calling him out on it. And last week Sansa was calling him out on it. And now he's just accepting that he's a bit dumb. All the while Varys kind of stands there in the background getting virtually no dialogue. I mean, honestly, why isn't Varys doing or saying anything? I mean, he was supposed to be like such a driving force in the show for years. I mean, he was this genius spy master. He was this knowledge base. He was super intelligent. He was like, figuring out all the ends. And now he's literally just standing in the background like a dude hanging out in his pajamas, like he's lost and a bit annoyed because he hasn't been given any lines in this scene. And it's a dumbing down of the show, and it's a real shame because, as I said, they did the same thing last season with Tyrion, but they also did it with Littlefinger. And as most people will tell you, the death of Littlefinger and the whole build up to that was one of the most unsatisfying things. In fact, there's a fantastic video by a channel called the Nerdwriter, which basically spells out a lot of the problems with last season. And one of the things he actually says is the problem with Littlefinger. But I'll link that below because it's well worth actually checking out. But finally, before we're done, I mean, we're on the brink of the abyss of the battle, so as it were. So predictions for next week, and these are all going to come spoiler free. So, and I'd like to say, just please, if you're going to comment, please don't comment anything about any leaks or releases or anything like that. No spoilers or anything. It's cool if you're just thinking this off the top of your head, but if you've read something somewhere, don't spoil it for people. It's not cool for me or for anyone reading it, and I'd really like to know what people think, but I also like to go into these episodes completely blind. So, anyway. Let's think about for a minute who's going to get dead next week. So here's my thoughts. Right, going to be honest, I think we're going to lose quite a few folk. I think either during the battle or maybe early the week after that, who are like dying from being injured or whatever, in the way that shows let this go. But straight off the bat, I'm calling dead on Beric Dondarrion. Because let's face it, he's not a big character, he's got that magic burny sword, and once the dead are defeated, he's going to have nothing else to do on the show, so they're going to probably write him out almost immediately. And I think obviously the fact that because I'm saying there because once he's defeated the dead, I think that obviously the good guys are going to win. They're not just going to run away because how could they? But I think what's going to happen is the walkers and the whites, they'll probably lose. So that means that, they'll defeat the Night's King. And I reckon that when he gets defeated though, I think he's going to take Bran down with him. Because Bran's far too overpowered to be left being psychic and stuff in like a post-undead battle show. Now, I think if he's going down, that means probably Theon's probably going to go with him because he's the one protecting him with the Iron Islanders. And that would be kind of ironic if he became a zombie because, what's dead can never die. And then he would literally become an undead, dead, never die man without a willy. Anyway, I think also we're probably going to lose another dragon because if they arrive in King's Landing at the end of the show with 2 dragons, it would be too easy. And if they arrive with 1, it's a bit harder. And they've been setting that up with even in the the big crossbow pointing at the dragon's skull. You see that in the opening of the show in the new one now. That's been added in. So I think that's going to play a major part. But yeah, I also think, I hate to say it, we're probably going to lose Tormund Giantsbane because I think that, frankly, a character like that, I think he's too good to keep around. And also because he wouldn't be going south, so you don't need him anymore. And also it frees up the love triangle for, Jaime and Brienne. I mean, I don't think either of them are going to go, but I could be wrong. But I do think Pod will probably go. So yeah, so there's my kill list. Beric, Bran, Pod, Theon, Tormund, and maybe, just maybe, the wee Mormont lassie as well. I don't know, I just have a feeling, a bad feeling. I could be wrong though. But yeah, so until next week in the Battle of Snow's Deep or whatever it is, I've been Ian, and these have been my grumpy opinions.